What if the country everyone thought would fold simply refused? Just minutes ago, President Donald Trump threatened to block a multi-billion-dollar bridge connecting the United States and Canada, demanding compensation and even ownership. But here's the question: compensated for what if Canada paid the upfront cost? Why is a project once praised as a vital economic link now being framed as unfair? And why did this sudden shift happen right as trade tensions were heating up? Is this really about steel and concrete, or is there something bigger behind the scenes? As Michigan businesses push forward and Canada stands firm, one question remains: who actually holds the leverage in this showdown? Here's the part that changes everything. The Gordie Howe International Bridge wasn't funded by the United States. It wasn't a shared upfront investment. It wasn't quietly financed behind the scenes by American taxpayers. Canada paid for it upfront, billions of dollars, over $4 billion committed directly by the Canadian federal government to get it built. And that detail matters, because when President Donald Trump said the US should be fully compensated and maybe even own half of the bridge, it raised one big question: compensated for what? Under the 2012 crossing agreement, Canada took on the financial risk, the construction costs, the early burden, the delays, the price tag. In return, toll revenue will first go toward paying Canada back. Only after those costs are recovered does Michigan become eligible for a share of the net toll revenue. That was the deal from the beginning. Then there's the materials claim. Trump suggested the bridge was built with virtually no American content, but Ontario Premier Doug Ford pushed back quickly. About 75% of the steel and concrete came from Canada, which makes sense since Canada paid for most of it, but roughly 25% came from U.S. suppliers. And on the Michigan side, American workers handled the construction using American materials. So the picture isn't one-sided. It's shared, just like the ownership structure. The bridge wasn't built to take advantage of anyone. It was designed to ease congestion at one of the busiest commercial crossings in North America. And once you look at the numbers, the outrage starts to look very different. Now here's where things get interesting. This wasn't always controversial. In fact, years ago, President Donald Trump supported the very same bridge. Back in 2017, during his first term, he praised it as a vital economic link between the United States and Canada. He talked about cooperation, about trade, about strengthening ties. Fast forward to today, and the tone is completely different. Suddenly, the bridge is being framed as unfair, as one-sided, as something the U.S. deserves more control over. That shift didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened during rising trade tensions between the two countries. There's the upcoming review of the USMCA trade agreement. There are ongoing disputes over dairy tariffs. Ontario recently pushed back against U.S. tariff moves with its own responses. And then there's Canada reopening trade conversations with China, something that reportedly frustrated Washington. Some analysts suggest this bridge dispute may not really be about steel or ownership at all. It may be leverage, a pressure point, a visible symbol in a larger trade chess match. That doesn't mean there's proof of a coordinated strategy, but the timing has raised eyebrows. When trade talks cool down, rhetoric often heats up, and the bridge suddenly became a headline at the exact moment other negotiations were stalled. What makes this even more striking is the contrast in tone. While Trump's comments were sharp and public, Mark Carney's response was measured and factual. No escalation, no counter-threats, just a calm explanation of the agreement. And that difference in approach may be shaping how this plays out next. Just when the debate seemed to be about trade policy, another detail surfaced, and it changed the tone completely. For decades, the Ambassador Bridge has handled most of the commercial traffic between Windsor and Detroit. It's privately owned by the Moran family, and for years, they fought the construction of the new Gordie Howe International Bridge. Why? Because once the new bridge opens, their near monopoly on truck traffic ends. Competition changes everything. Reports revealed that a meeting took place between representatives connected to the Ambassador Bridge interests and U.S. officials shortly before President Trump publicly criticized the new bridge. Around the same time, filings showed significant political donations connected to groups aligned with Trump. Now, to be clear, there is no confirmed proof that these events directly influenced the president's statements. But the timing raised questions. Lawmakers have even called for oversight to examine whether lobbying efforts played any role in the sudden escalation. When you look at it from a business perspective, the stakes are obvious. The Gordie Howe Bridge will bring competition. It will split traffic. It will change revenue streams that have existed for years. And when that much money is involved, pressure tends to follow. So some observers are asking, is this really about national fairness, or is it about protecting existing interests? Again, those are questions, not conclusions. But the fact that they're being asked shows how complicated this situation has become. And while that debate grows louder, Canada's position hasn't changed. While headlines grew dramatic, Mark Carney's tone stayed steady. No threats, no fiery speeches, no sudden policy moves. Instead, he calmly laid out the facts. Canada funded the project. The agreement was signed years ago. Ownership is already shared with Michigan. American workers and materials were part of the construction. He framed the bridge as what it was always meant to be, a symbol of cooperation. That calm approach matters. Because the Windsor-Detroit corridor is one of the busiest commercial land crossings in North America. Billions of dollars in goods move through that region every single day. Auto parts, food products, and manufacturing supplies, entire supply chains depend on that flow. Blocking or delaying the bridge wouldn't just affect Canada. It would hit Michigan businesses, U.S. workers, regional factories that rely on fast transport between the two countries. That's why several Michigan lawmakers and business groups voiced support for the bridge opening as planned. The Detroit Regional Chamber even called it one of the most important infrastructure projects in the region's modern history. Carney leaned into that shared benefit. He emphasized tourism, commerce, and everyday travel. He avoided turning it into a personal clash. And sometimes that kind of restraint sends a stronger signal than outrage ever could, because when one side escalates and the other side stays grounded, the contrast becomes clear. Here's the part many experts are quietly pointing out. The bridge is almost complete. It's physically connected to interstate systems on both sides. The infrastructure is built. The agreements are signed. The funding is documented. Stopping it now wouldn't just be a political statement. It would create economic shockwaves. The existing Ambassador Bridge already handles hundreds of millions of dollars in trade daily. The new bridge was designed to reduce congestion and increase efficiency. Faster crossings mean lower costs for businesses. Lower costs mean more competitive prices. And that benefits consumers on both sides of the border. If the U.S. were to block or delay the opening, supply chains could tighten. Truck traffic could bottleneck. Businesses could face new uncertainty. And in trade relationships, uncertainty is expensive. That's why many analysts believe the threat may be more rhetorical than practical, because actually enforcing it could hurt American industries just as much as Canadian ones. Meanwhile, Canada's position remains unchanged. The project followed the agreement. The financing structure is transparent. The ownership model is documented. And the economic logic still favors cooperation. Which brings us back to the bigger picture. This isn't just about a bridge made of steel and concrete. It's about leverage, about negotiation tactics, about how two longtime partners handle tension in a moment of political heat. And sometimes the strongest move isn't pushing harder. It's standing firm and letting the numbers speak for themselves.